Hi there, my name is Brittany Dieter, and you are listening to the Biologicals Product Management webcasts. This is 2 of 5 cold chain breaks in transit. Let's get started. So as we just discussed on the last slide in the first section, about 16% of all cold chain incidents that happened last year occurred in transit, and that number has decreased quite dramatically in recent years, as you'll see in a moment. When talking about cold chain breaks in transit, a couple of things that we're going to discuss are reefer trucks and the vaccine ordering schedule, monitoring temperature during travel to the health authority from the pharmacy, cold chain break indicators, reading and returning temp tails, reporting cold chain breaks that occur in transit, packing and returning vaccines correctly, tracking vaccines if they have a first strike between the pharmacy and the health authority, and finally PSLS, which is the Patient Safety and Learning System. And as I just noted, the number of cold chain breaks that occurred in transit last year was 16%. That's decreased quite dramatically because of standard delivery schedules, greater use of reefer or refrigerated trucks, and finally, consistent temp tail use. Before, breaks used to account for about 35% of wastage. That's obviously been reduced. Next slide. So let's start by talking about reefer trucks and scheduling. The time between deliveries obviously can impact the amount of vaccine that you're going to need to order, the supply of vaccine that you're going to need to order. And we discussed this a little bit in section 4 of 5, which is surplus. Talk about how to go about deciding what amount of vaccine you're going to use in, say, the week or 2 weeks or 1 month between vaccine deliveries. And you're going to make sure that you order correctly by the correct day to make sure that your vaccines make it out on the next truck. Knowing that the reefer truck schedule, when the reefer truck is going to come by, is particularly important in remote communities because there may be significant time between deliveries. As much as possible, the refrigerated truck is used because it has dramatically decreased the amount of cold chain breaks that have occurred between the pharmacy and the field. The other option then would be using a courier, and with a courier, we have to pack ice or cold ballast, I guess, basically in with the vaccines because the vaccines are just shipped in kind of an open air container or open air truck with no particular outside ambient temperature. I guess correctness, the ambient temperature isn't kept between 2 and 8, which creates some difficulty, obviously, for keeping the vaccines really cold. And as we'll learn later, deep frozen ice packs are one of the biggest reasons for vaccine freezing. So using vaccine shipped by courier means that you always are running the risk of putting those deep frozen ice packs in, and you may potentially get frozen vaccine out of it. Let's talk about monitoring vaccine temperature in travel. We use 2 separate things. Often when the vaccine goes by courier, and I'm not sure how often this is done anymore, but for a long time and possibly still you may see these, you'll see a one-time use temperature indicator, often again that one in the courier shipments. Warm indicators are time and temperature indicators. They have an activation point of about 10 degrees and a runout time of about 48 hours to 7 days. You'll see what I mean in just a second. These are actually both freeze watches. But you can see with this type of one-time use indicator, you'll have a dye or an ink at the bottom of this container. And when it gets warm, pretend that this is a warm indicator, not a freeze indicator. When it gets warm at 10 degrees, the fluid will start to flow up and it will flow along the side of this. And on a warm indicator that can tell you, roughly about how long it's been exposed, there would be markings that would say maybe 1 hour, 8 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours. So you'd have an idea of how long the vaccine had been exposed to warm temperatures. For freeze indicators, what happens is when the fluid in this chamber freezes, it breaks the chamber and starts to leak up here. So with a freeze indicator, if there's any ink that's sort of spilled out of the central bulb, then you know that it's been frozen and therefore there has been a cold chain break. Obviously, the disadvantage to using either a freeze or a warm indicator is that they only tell you that it got to, say, 0 or it got to 10. It doesn't tell you if it went below 0. It doesn't tell you necessarily if it went over 10. And the freeze indicators give you no indication of how long the vaccine was exposed to freezing temperatures. And the warm indicators only give you a rough idea. It's not as precise as we would like it to be to make a determination about whether or not we can still use that vaccine. Next slide. So we're talking about courier deliveries here. And something that I mentioned, this is a form that you would fill out if you got a courier delivery. You can see it says courier up here. This is a new form. This would be included in the actual form. And this is for a courier delivery that has a temp tail in it, which we'll talk about in a second. So I'm not going to go into the real specifics of this whole temp tail part. But what I'm just going to talk to you about is when you're filling out this form for a courier delivery, you're going to see a couple of special things, like they're going to ask you frozen ice packs that were in there. Were they hard? Were they mushy? Were they warm? Refrigerated gel packs, were they warm? Were they cool? What did the vaccine feel like to temperature? And there are quite specific instructions that I'll go through in a second. But just the point is that with courier deliveries, you're going to have problems because of the frozen ice packs. They're going to ask you frozen ice packs on top, how many were used, refrigerated gel packs, how many were used, all of those kinds of things. And were they packed on top? Were they packed underneath? What happened, basically? Trying to figure out what caused the break so that it could be avoided in the future. Before going any further with this, I'm just going to move on to the next slide, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about temp tails. So the long and the short of it for this courier form is they may still be using the one-time use indicators for some courier deliveries. For other courier deliveries, you might get the temp tail form. You'll see the temp tail in a second. I'll explain all about it, don't worry. But the difference between shipments that come from the reefer and shipments that come via courier is going to be the use of things like frozen ice packs, refrigerated gel packs, different kinds of boxes that are used to try to keep the vaccine at a safer temperature. And that's because those courier shipments are a lot less reliable in terms of maintaining the cold chain than are shipments that come in the refrigerated truck. So let's talk about monitoring temperature, and this could be either from the reefer truck again or from a courier, any shipment that uses something called a temp tail. So what happens? You are alone in the health unit on a Thursday afternoon, no one else is around, everyone's busy in clinic maybe, and you receive a box of biological products from either source. As soon as you get them, you're going to unpack and refrigerate them in a monitored refrigerator. You're going to check them for evidence of physical damage. So does any of the vaccine have, say, for example, ice chips in it? Or is something melting inside it? I'm not sure what would be melting, but is there any evidence of excessive heat? Or is there evidence of actual physical damage? Did something crush the box accidentally, or did the courier drop it on the way in? You're going to remove the temperature monitoring device, which is the temp tail, and you're going to read it, fill out the form we talked about, and return it in a prepaid bubble envelope right back to the CDC. If there's a problem with the vaccine, if there's evidence of physical damage, if the temp tail tells you that something's wrong, you're going to follow the algorithm on the next slide. But the most important thing is if you have any question whatsoever about vaccine that you receive, quarantine it and await instruction regarding its use. Quarantine it in a monitored refrigerator, but quarantine it nonetheless. Keep it away from other vaccines. Make sure you know exactly what vaccine may or may not have been exposed to any type of problem. This is just some vaccine that's been quarantined. You can see it's separated. It's still in the monitored refrigerator, but there's a clear sign obviously saying do not use this vaccine, and it's kept separate from other vaccine, but we are still in a monitored refrigerator. So this is the temp tail that we've spoken about. A temp tail is just a monitoring device, and basically what it gives you is a diary of exactly what temperature the vaccines were exposed to and for how long. And they are very reliable and quite accurate. What then happens is the temp tail will be started when it leaves the BC CDC pharmacy and goes in the truck or in the courier. When it comes to you, you're going to stop it according to instructions that we'll talk about in a second. And then it's going to give you a readout, some information on this LCD screen. It's going to tell you exactly what happened to it, and I'll tell you how to read this in just a second. However, it's only going to give you kind of a quick snapshot, almost, on this little LCD screen. What you're then going to do, if there's any concern whatsoever, is you're going to pack it up in the prepaid bubble envelope, send it back to the BC CDC pharmacy, where they will then plug it in and get a complete computerized printout that says it was this hot, it was this cold, it was this hot for this long, then it was this cold. Gives a very precise, almost fingerprint of exactly what temperature and for how long the vaccines were exposed. When you get the temp tail, you're going to press that stop button as we just talked about. And when you get the temp tail, it's going to give you sort of a picture that's going to look something like this. And I'll talk about exactly what all of these things mean. But it gives you information about what its average temperature was. It can tell you highest temperature recorded, cumulative time above the high temperature limit, lowest temperature recorded, and cumulative time below low temperature limit. So that's what they're going to get from it back at the CDC pharmacy when they plug it in. Here's what we find out. From the sunshine icon, we can tell that it was turned on. So it was actually started when it left the pharmacy. This little stop icon obviously is going to tell you that you've successfully stopped it. This little bell is sad. It means that there's an alarm. So it means that it either went below the high temperature or below the low temperature limit or above the high temperature limit. This is all quite complex. Don't worry, it's all written down, as you can see here. This form will come in the vaccine shipment along with the temp tail. So as I mentioned, first thing you're going to do, you get your vaccine, you're going to pop it in the fridge, you're going to pop it in the fridge, take that temp tail out of the box, and you're going to look at it. And you're going to check first to see, is there a sunshine symbol? That sunshine symbol means that the vaccine was turned on. So if it wasn't, there hasn't been any temperature recording for this vaccine. So the first thing you're going to do is quarantine it, as we just discussed. You'll contact the biologicals desk, and they're going to give you information about what to do with the vaccine after looking at the refrigerated truck records. If there is a sunshine, fantastic. We're going to press and hold the red stop button, and that little stop sign will appear in the corner of the LCD. The bell symbol is big trouble, as I said. That's the alarm. If it appears in the bottom right corner, then you're going to quarantine those vaccines, keeping them segregated from other usable inventory while you wait for BC CDC response. You're going to send in the temp tail for them to read it. So you have the little bell symbol. There's an alarm. When you press the green start button again, it's going to give you a view and a record of the transit temperature history, and you'll fill that information in. It's that information that we just talked about on the very bottom of the last slide. You're going to record that information on the form that's included, complete and fax that form in, return the temp tail in the prepaid bubble envelope, and you'll be contacted regarding what to do with that quarantined vaccine. If you press the red stop button and there's no little bell symbol, no alarm appears, fantastic. The vaccine has been sent under cold chain conditions and it's fine to use. Regardless, you're going to go ahead and press that red start button and you're going to get the information just like you would for the cold chain the vaccine that has been quarantined. You're going to go ahead and return it regardless because the temp tails, their home is at the pharmacy, so they need to go back to the pharmacy. And you're going to enclose a copy of that form that you completed regardless one way or the other. Send it back. However, if there's no alarm and the vaccine is fine to use, then you're obviously not going to wait for BC CDC pharmacy to contact you regarding quarantine, because there won't be any. This is the temp tail form for the refrigerated truck deliveries. As I said, all of this information, this algorithm, and the sheet will come with your temp tail. And the differences you can see between this one and the one that came on the courier is there's no information about were there ice packs on top, were there ice packs at the bottom. It just basically has the basic information, what shipment was this, which temp tail is it, we make sure that it's working correctly. And then when you press that start button again, it's going to give you this information, the average temperature, lowest temperature, highest temperature, duration of highest temperature, duration of lowest temperature. Always important to fill out your name, phone number, and fax, because if they need to contact someone If for whatever reason when they get the temp tail back it's defective, say for example, and you actually do need to quarantine the vaccine, they need to know who to call, who has access to this information and knows where that vaccine is. All right, have a look here, yet more algorithms. So what do we do if there's a cold chain incident between BC CDC and the health authority? If you have the warm cold indicator activated, we've already talked about this, we're going to quarantine it, labeling it do not use, and you're going to consult with the BC CDC pharmacist because they're going to have a look generally at what happened. They're going to make a decision about what to do with that vaccine and tell you. If the temp tail is alarmed, you're going to quarantine it. You're going to fill out that form that we just saw. You're going to ship the temp tail back. And in both cases, if there's any problems, so if the warm cold activator is activated or the temp tail is alarmed, you're going to basically quarantine the vaccine, fill in forms, talk to the CDC pharmacist, and then obtain a determination of vaccine usability. The vaccines are usable. I should mention here, depending on what your health authority or your health unit policy is, you may want to talk to your biological product consultant at any of these points. Do talk to them about what they'd like to hear from you. The vaccines are usable, fantastic. Just call your BPC and say, yep, they're good to go. You're going to remove them from quarantine, but you must first label them as being exposed to a first cold chain incident. Any vaccine that's been exposed to a cold chain incident needs to have a little history sheet that goes along with it. Usually that would be in some sort of log somewhere saying this vaccine, this lot number, this date, here's what happened. And you're going to put usually a little dot, a little red dot on the vaccine. Just so that everyone knows this vaccine has been exposed already, and you're going to want to use any vaccine with a dot on it first. And that is most vaccine that's exposed to a break that's an average break, say between 0 and 25 degrees, is likely to be usable again. We'll talk about that in section 3 in the vaccine stability chart section. However, lots of vaccine that is still usable after a first break will not be usable after a second break. So basically, as soon as it's been exposed to a break, we want to get it the heck out of Dodge. We want to use it as quickly as possible while it's still good to avoid any possibility that it might be exposed to another break. If the vaccines are not usable, then you're going to inform your biologicals product consultant, and you're going to complete a field return form, which you will then fax back to BC CDC pharmacy. They will send you an authorization number saying, yes, we're aware these vaccines are coming in. Here's the number to write down on your little form. And you're going to return the vaccines to BC CDC with the form. Don't worry about maintaining cold chain. These vaccines are unusable anyway, so the cold chain would just be, a bit of a waste of your time. Here is what a field return form looks like. This is a new field return form, so if you're used to seeing the old one, it might be a bit confusing. Largely what's changed is the codes here. You can see code A is cold chain incident due to a power outage. Code B is cold chain incident equipment malfunction. C, cold chain incident handling error. D is damaged product, like we talked about if the courier had dropped it. E is expired product. F is surplus vaccine, which is still good, that's going back to the CDC for redistribution. That's the one code where it's essential that cold chain is maintained. If the vaccine is expired, if it's no good to use, if it's exposed to a cold chain incident and it's a fatal break and they tell you just send it back, not a big deal. However, if it's surplus vaccine coming back for redistribution, which we'll talk about in section 5, expiry, then it does need to still be under cold chain conditions. So G is the wrong product was shipped or was requested. H is a product recall by manufacturer. I is the annual influenza harvest. It's obviously very difficult to predict what influenza demand is going to be. Sometimes we end up with quite a bit too much, or even just a little bit too much. That needs to come back in a separate system because obviously that's quite different than our normal vaccines that we give, that we should be able to control quite tightly what our wastage is. It's much harder to predict what demand for influenza will be. J is a cold chain incident in transit between BC CDC and the health unit. So that's what we're talking about here. You're going to use code J for this cold chain break. And K is a cold chain incident in transit within the health authority. So that's something that we're going to talk about in the next section, cold chain breaks in the field. So for what we've just discussed here, cold chain breaks in transit, you're going to use code J. All of the same information that you would generally have, what the vaccine was, what its product code was, lot number that you're going to write in. When is this vaccine's expiry date? What's the reason it's coming back for? That's where you're going to put your reason code. And finally, what number of doses. Important to remember what number of doses, not number of units that you're sending back, number of doses. Also, the health unit, what your address is, a phone number, and a fax number where someone can be contacted. And all of these forms are going to get faxed in to 604-707-2581, and that's where they'll give you your authorization code. And here's where you would put in the name of yourself, the biological products monitor. When we have vaccine that is going back to the to the BC CDC pharmacy from the health authority, it's important that you pack and return it correctly. You want to pack the vials in a box with packing material so that they don't break. Returned unusable vaccines not hazardous, so no special warning signs or special handling notices are necessary. But you do want to keep a like vaccine with like. As when the vaccine comes back to us, it's reconciled. So someone says, okay, this is what we sent out. Here's what we think was given to somebody from our IFIS records. Here's what we have coming back to the health authority to the pharmacy in the harvest. So we know that this wasn't given. All of the numbers add up. Cam is the person on this end who does that. And so he says, thanks for keeping like with like, because that makes obviously his process of reconciling it much easier. An exception to returning vaccines that have been exposed to a cold chain break or in any situation would be vaccines that have been drawn up in a syringe for administration. You would not want to return those because they're obviously a health and safety risk since they have a needle on them. You might want to report them as destroyed on the wastage form, and you're just going to put them in a hard-sided sharps container like you would any other. Syringes. As I said, after the vaccines have been exposed to a first strike, you're going to put a red dot on them. The temperature and duration information obviously is going to come to you from the vaccine pharmacy service, but the red dot is what you're going to pop on there. And there should be a protocol within your health authority for labeling products if those products have another exposure. So if they aren't used right away, like we talked about, and they happen to have another cold chain break, then you would have to use a separate system, maybe 2 dots, maybe, I'm not sure, maybe a special label if they're still usable. But generally, vaccines that have been exposed need to be used up right away because often they won't survive a second break. The patient safety and learning system is something that tracks all of the cold chain breaks in transit. Until the vaccine gets to you and is received in the field, it's considered to be sort of the property, I guess, of the BC Centre for Disease Control Pharmacy. So it's their job to then record what happened, why did it happen, and try to fix those things. And the way to do that is by getting data analyzed in a system like the patient safety and learning system. When the temp tail reports come back and the manifests come back from vaccines that were exposed, they're entered into the program, they're approved by pharmacy, and then they're analyzed for what was the transportation used, what was the root cause of the break, what was the maximum and minimum temperature exposure, and finally, what was the duration of that exposure. I would like to thank you very much for sticking with me through section 2 of 5, cold chain breaks in transit. If you have any questions, please ask your biological product consultant, or you can call some of the folks here either at the pharmacy, or you could call me, Brittany Dieter, vaccine educator here at the BC CDC. Thank you very much.